Day 150 to 12:31 a.m. Vehicle parking area. Military outpost. Santo Domingo Elementary School. Barangay Santo Domingo. Municipality of Verac, Catanduanes. The atmosphere was gloomy after they dug up the reason for the sergeant's outburst. On the other hand, Mark did not care. Since Mark finished telling the soldiers about the girl and the existence of demons in Bato, he began to cover the plastic dresser once more. Wait. General Padilla stepped forward after seeing what Mark was doing. That girl, what are you going to do with her? This. Mark pointed at the girl struggling in her restraints. I'm bringing her to my base for study. What? A soldier voiced out his confusion. Don't you have any conscience? She's still a former human. Don't look at me like that. Mark snickered. You guys capturing infected specimens for study and experiments are not any different. Remember, the infected are former humans too. The soldier froze, unable to retort. Is there no possible way of turning back the feral demons you spoke about? Lieutenant Macapagal asked. So far as I know, there's none, Mark replied, covering the dresser. You can consider them similar to infected, just not contagious with their bites. General Padilla was in deep thought about the conversation. It was when his eyes fell onto the other two dressers on the back of Chaflar. Does those two dressers contain feral demons too? The general asked. Yeah, Mark replied and turned to the general. But I'll answer what you have in mind. It's a no. Is it obvious? The general turned to Vanessa. Yes, General. Vanessa replied, making the general shrug. General Padilla thought of asking Mark for at least one of the three feral demons he had. Unfortunately, Mark already declined before he could ask. But then, Mark threw a bomb. You can catch one on your own. Just find a muddy rice paddy near a river at midnight outside of Bato. You guys will probably find hundreds of them. Mark smirked and then added. But I'll warn you all. Catching one can cost you a few dozen lives. The soldiers frowned, hearing Mark's warning. Are these children that dangerous? One soldier asked, looking at the dresser that Mark already covered. She might look harmless since she's restrained. Mark turned to that soldier. But if I remove her restraints, believe me, she can slaughter you all here even if you all have guns. The soldiers could not help but step back at Mark's threat. Who would have thought that Mark was showing them such a dangerous creature without them knowing? This girl was much worse than the infected. Mark smirked, seeing the reactions of the soldiers. He was not lying, though. The speed of these feral demons was too fast for regular humans. Unless they were close combat experts or speed-type mutators, they would have great difficulties just to deal with the girl inside the dresser. It would be much worse if the soldiers tried to fight these feral demons on their home ground. There was nothing else to question, and Mark already told all the things he wanted the soldiers to know. It did not take long for the meeting to end, and Mark left the soldiers to their business. Returning to their tent, Mark shrugged. May was awake, waiting for him. It was the usual and was not surprising anymore. Still, Mark could not help but smile at her gestures. Soon, he joined May and the girls inside the tent once more. Unfortunately, an hour after he laid down, Mark opened his eyes once more. Ha! Seriously? Mark murmured as he turned to May. May was, again, hugging Mark in her sleep. This time, her grip was a bit tighter than before. Mark could not help but feel a bit of pity to peel her off his body. However, there was no helping it this time. For the second time in this night, Mark walked out of the tent. Day 150 to 2:13 a.m. Forest area, military outpost, Santo Domingo Elementary School, Barangay Santo Domingo, Municipality of Verac, Catanduanes. Behind the Santo Domingo military outpost was a small mountain covered in flora. It served as a natural defense on the south side of the outpost. However, since it was quite forested, it could also serve as a good place to stealthily move around. At this time, Mark entered the forest after sneaking out of the outpost. He walked for a bit and stood in the middle of a small clearing surrounded by trees. So, What do you want from me? Mark suddenly spoke, even though no one could be seen in the surroundings. That was when a silhouette of a person jumped down from one of the trees. Since the surroundings were dark, it would be hard to make out the appearance of the person. Mark, of course, knew who this person was. You really are something else. The person spoke. You led me here on purpose, huh? Did you follow me here just to give meaningless compliments, Ms. Vanessa? Mark turned to the silhouette. That was right. It was the general's secretary, Vanessa. I just want to talk with you for a bit. Vanessa replied. Talk to me as who? Mark tilted his head. As the general's secretary, or that Felix's accomplice. Vanessa stood with her back on the trunk of the tree behind her and her right hand on her waist. Her manners were unlike when she was standing beside General Padilla as his secretary. Instead, Vanessa felt more like a wild panther lurking in the dark. Since when did you know and how? Vanessa asked. I already heard from Felix that you knew about me, but I believe that I never showed any suspicious behavior in front of you. You think that it's enough to only act in front of the person? Mark replied with another question. However, Vanessa seemed to understand something from Mark's reply. She was exposed when she was not acting in front of anyone. Since it doesn't look like I'm getting an answer with that question, then I'll move to the next one. Vanessa declared with her eyes looking stern at Mark. What are your motives for revealing the existence of demons to the military? Motives. Mark smiled. Can't you think that I just want to give a little bit of service to the country? Vanessa frowned. It looked like Mark had no intention of answering her questions at all. It was not surprising, but she still expected to get some information. However, that answer just now was complete nonsense that did not contain any clue at all. Did you call me out just for this? Mark asked. That Felix said that you guys sell information. You should know that it's not easy, right? Don't think that just because I came here meant that I will let you get any clue from my mouth. Tisk. Vanessa clicked her tongue. Actually, Vanessa had many ways of forcefully getting information. She could use seduction. Her appearance and figure were cultivated for that. She could also use poison, blackmail, threats, and other illegal things. Unfortunately, the target of questioning was Mark. A person that Roach declared to be too dangerous to offend. If she tried anything that could offend Mark and did not work at all, she might as well slit her throat and die with her own hands. Seduction. Vanessa did not dare to either. There was no way that someone that had May as his wife would fall for her. Vanessa stared at Mark. Since it was already late in the night, she was allowed to rest and had time to do what was needed. She just wanted to observe his group for a bit while she had a chance to. But suddenly, Mark sneaked out of the outpost and entered the forest for some unknown reason. Of course, she followed him. To lead her out to this place, what were Mark's motives? He did not seem to emit any killing intent, either. With Vanessa falling silent, Mark shrugged. Actually, I want to talk to you too. Or rather, do business. Mark declared. After meddling with us, you want to talk about business? Vanessa asked with a frown. You're wrong about that, Mark replied. Your so-called business meddled with my goals first. I believe, you already know that, right? Vanessa fell silent. That was right. From what Felix said, the rebels might have killed Mark's family, one of the reasons why he headed to this island in the first place. Then, it was their business that interfered with Mark's first. Still, Vanessa was not comfortable about it. If Mark continued to meddle about things on this island, not only one but two deals they had here would fail. Mark already destroyed the rebels, which tipped the balance of power on the island to the side of the military. Now that Mark revealed the existence of the demons, clashes between the government and the demons were not inevitable. Of the two factions on the island, any of them falling would result in their last mission failing. It was a critical thing as their credibility would be questioned after failing two missions in one go. In that case, Vanessa decided to take a gamble. You and our group already clashed once. How come that you still want to conduct business with us? Are you not afraid that we will sabotage you? Vanessa asked. Sabotage me. Mark smiled. Don't make me laugh. Since earlier, you already showed that you are too mindful of your business here. You guys put your business in the utmost importance. If I paid you guys for a mission, you will do the same, right? Besides, you people are businessmen dealing with things like information. In information trading, the thing you guys needed the most is trust. If others knew that your members sabotaged a client, the credibility of your business will take a hit too, am I right? Vanessa's frown went deeper. And then, she relaxed all of a sudden. She then released a sigh. All right, you got me. What Mark said was right. For an information broker, trust and credibility were the most important things. No one would buy information to brokers that could not be trusted or had no credibility. Once this part of their business was compromised, their other businesses would also take a huge hit. Besides, there was one thing that Mark did not know. The members of CNC were being monitored by the higher UPS. Business and private life could not be mixed. The only exception was if a member paid for the commission, like how Felix did to support Amelin and the rebels. As such, even if they failed a mission because of Mark, and he conducted business with them, they could not do anything to Mark on a personal level. Furthermore, as a client, they would not be able to harm Mark without grave consequences. It was unless Mark was purposely aiming to hinder their business, which he did not. The Crystallis Notitia Cetus was a business organization through and through. That was how it continued to exist and would continue to exist in the future. Then, let me introduce myself. Vanessa spoke. Information gatherer. Val Flora, at your service. What kind of business do you want to do with me? Vanessa bowed down respectively. She was already in business mode. It was far different from when she was acting as a military secretary and at the start of her conversation with Mark. This is more like it. Mark smiled, looking at Vanessa. No. Val Flora with a renewed outlook. I want to buy information. Are you guys still capable of gathering information around the world even if it's already like this? Mark spoke. Please do not underestimate our network. Val Flora replied. Even if it is from the other side of the world, we can gather information. However, at an equivalent price. Then, good. Mark smiled and thought. Looks like I finally found a better way to find the inheritors. Day 150 to 2:29 a.m. Forest Area, Military Outpost, Santo Domingo Elementary School, Barangay Santo Domingo, Municipality of Verac, Catanduanes. Mark stared at the woman in front of him. The darkness of the night barely affected his sight, after all. And to say, she was a very peculiar woman. She was too different from when she was serving as the general's secretary. Also different from her behavior just now. This woman. This Val Flora. She was a natural actress. No, rather than acting, it felt more like she had a switch inside her head that she could use to change her behavior. Mark found it quite interesting. After all, the change in her behavior was not only outside. Her thoughts and emotions also went with the sudden change. She did not change her hair or clothes. Mark had also seen her change her demeanor in front of him. And yet, it did not take away the feeling that he was currently speaking with a different person. If Mark did not have the ability to sense a person's mental and emotional fluctuations, he might start thinking that Val Flora had split personalities. Is there something wrong? Val Flora raised her head and asked Mark. It was because he suddenly had a pause while in the middle of the conversation. I'm just thinking about the payment, Mark replied. What kinds of payment do your organization accept? After hearing what Mark said, Val Flora smiled. It was clear that Mark was a first-time customer of their services. Thus, before starting the transaction, the most suitable thing to ask first was the kind of payment they accept. It was what Val Flora also hinted at when she replied with the phrase, at an equivalent price, to Mark's question. After all, Val Flora had been in this business since she remembered. There were already countless times that it happened. Dumb clients that went directly to business details without knowing what to pay for the service. There's no restriction on anything. Whether it be human currencies or barter trade, we accept it. Val Flora replied. However, at the current state of the world, the human currencies dropped its value to almost nothing. From there, Val Flora explained how the direct transactions with the organization worked. The organization had its own point system. It evaluates the value of things changes depending on the current affairs of the world. The economic system, supply and demand, stock exchange, foreign exchange, and many other things affect the point system directly. This system created a fair evaluation of transactions under the organization. This kind of system gave the organization another level of trust from the sellers and buyers it had. It was because this system ensured fair prices on both sides. Of course, this system also made swindlers and scammers afraid of the unforgiving organization. Such kinds of people were erased after trying to conduct fraudulent acts. It became easier to discover such acts because of the point system. Currently, the human currency fell to almost no value. The value of coins now depended on their material, while bills were worthless. In the apocalypse, paper money could not be recycled for another usage. It was unlike coins that could be melted to create new things. Right now, weapons had the highest rise in value within this point system. After all, it was the most in demand in the apocalypse. How do you guys determine the value of items? Mark asked after understanding how payment works. At Mark's question, Val Flora replied with a smile. Then, Val Flora touched the left side of her neck with her left hand while she stretched out her right arm forward. Afterward, she closed her eyes and lowered her face. She then began to mutter inaudible words. It was when a mark appeared on her neck, at the area touched by her left hand. Because of the darkness in the surroundings, the glowing mark could be seen clearly. Unfortunately, her hand was covering most of it. Still, with what was exposed, Mark could make up what the mark was. Scales. Mark murmured. That was right. The mark on Val Flora's neck was a scale. A measuring scale, to be precise. The very same symbol of the Libra zodiac. Of course, the mark was not just some roughly drawn scale. It was more or less appeared to be an art with intricate details. Furthermore, even though it was just a glowing mark, anyone would be able to tell that the scales were made of crystal. It was the symbol of Crystallis Notitia Cetus, a symbol portraying balance and equivalent exchange. Val Flora then opened her eyes. At the same time, a magic circle appeared in front of her outstretched arm. And to say, Mark was a bit familiar with the magical aura emanating from that magic circle. Without a doubt, it was a summoning magic circle, a bit similar to what Barak had. However, Val Flora was not a magician. There was no way that she was a summoner either, since she did not have an ounce of magical energy in her body. Instead, this summoning circle was created using the magic imbued in the mark on Val Flora's neck. The magic circle flashed a bright light and a creature flew out of it. Circling once around the clearing, the creature then landed on Val Flora's right shoulder. Mark stared at the creature. It was a large, black owl with golden glowing eyes. Then, Mark noticed. This owl was not a physical being. Its entire body was made of magical energy. A magical familiar? Mark asked Val Flora. Yes. Val Flora nodded, removing her hand from the mark on her neck. This is my wise owl called Odessa. She is connected to our organization's point system and will evaluate things depending on the current exchange rate. What a convenient thing. Mark's interest was surely piqued. All of us agents of the organization had our own magical familiars connected to the system. It is made so that we can conduct business anywhere and anytime. Val Flora explained. At the same time, while being introduced, the owl on Val Flora's shoulder bowed its head. Surely, it was showing a high level of intelligence. Well then, should we proceed to your request? Val Flora asked. Normally, we go to a suitable room or office when accepting requests. Unfortunately, we did not have such luxury this time. No, it's fine here, Mark replied. We don't much time to change places anyway. Val Flora agreed with that. This meeting was abrupt, after all. In the first place, she only wanted to observe Mark. She did not expect this to become a business opportunity either. Then, Mark took out a small notebook from his pocket. This notebook was already old. It was the very same notebook he had for months, even before the outbreak started. Mark then started to write in the notebook. It took about 5 minutes after Mark finished. He then tore off the page that he wrote on and approached Val Flora to give it. Unlike before, there was no tension between Mark and Val Flora. Even when the two were close to each other, none of them made any suspicious moves. There was nothing but a business atmosphere. Val Flora then skimmed over the contents of the paper Mark gave her. She was quite surprised. What a peculiar request, Val Flora spoke. The events 6 years ago. Even I knew of it. I never thought that you would be searching for the victims of that event. Are you going to accept this or not? Mark asked. There is no reason for me to decline it, Val Flora smiled. However, the price for this information would be a hefty sum. It will be hard to determine the price right away. I don't mind the cost, Mark replied. But since the price won't be determined, I'm sure you will be asking for a down payment, right? My apologies, but yes. In circumstances like this, we would only accept a deal with a down payment. There is no way that we would be able to start to gather information without capital. Then, how much? Mark asked with a shrug. At Mark's question, Val Flora did not reply immediately. Instead, she held up the page of the notebook in front of her, Wise Owl. The Wise Owl, Odessa, then began reading the contents of the page like a human being. After reading the contents of the page, the eyes of Odessa flashed a golden glow several times. At the same time, the mark on Val Flora's neck did the same. It was clear that the owl was communicating with Val Flora through that mark. But then, Val Flora let out a sigh. The estimated down payment is 250,000 points. Val Flora declared. At the current exchange rate, it is equivalent to around 2,501 kilo gold bars. So, a 1 kilo gold bar is only about 100 points, huh? Mark estimated. Yes, unfortunately, Val Flora replied. Before the outbreak, gold had a higher value. But now, it could be considered useless to most people. Even magicians and alchemists that use gold aren't that many. Hearing that, Mark nodded. Then, can you determine the value of this? Mark said as he showed a wind elemental crystal on his hand. It was smaller than a marble as it came from the infected sylphs that Mark killed before. Seeing the small crystal, Val Flora was not amazed. She just mentioned gold bars before. However, Mark took out a small toy-like crystal that might not even have any value in her eyes. Nonetheless, Mark was a customer. As such, she accepted the crystal and put it in front of her, Wise Owl. The Wise Owl then started at the crystal. To Val Flora's surprise, the owl stared at it for a whole minute without moving. Finally, its eyes flashed several times. Val Flora froze. WWW Pure Wind Elemental Energy Crystal worth 100,000 points. Val Flora blurted out in shock. Hey, you're breaking character. Mark reminded the shocked woman in front of her. Val Flora froze once more. This time, because of embarrassment. Ahem. My apologies. Val Flora coughed as she handed the crystal back to Mark with utmost care. She was afraid that she would drop the crystal and get blamed for it if it broke. Is it that shocking? Mark asked. Oh, of Sue. Ahem. Yes, it is. Val Flora was red in the face. She could not hide her agitation as she stared at Mark that did not seem to care about the crystal on his hand. She then began to explain. Magical energy crystals are always in high demand but low in supply. However, I never saw something like that. All elemental crystals I had seen so far were rough and filled with impurities. It could not be helped as magical energy on Earth is very thin, and pollution is everywhere. Crystals with perfectly sphere shapes are, to say, non-existent. Not to mention an attributed magical energy crystal with pure energy. That was why I accidentally showed disgraceful conduct in front of you. Once more, my apologies. I see. Mark nodded. Well, I actually thought that it would fetch a higher price. Sadly, it was not my role to price things. Val Flora replied with an apologetic tone. It seemed that she also thought that the crystal should be valued higher. However, the pricing was not her call. Then, this crystal can be used for payment, right? Mark stated the obvious. Yes. Val Flora nodded. Though I don't know why you would willingly use such a valuable thing as a payment for this, a single crystal would not be enough. I know. Mark replied as he took out two more wind element crystals. One was smaller than the other two, though. Val Flora's eyes turned to dots. You know that you're breaking character again, right? Mark warned. However, this time, Val Flora was really shaken inside. She just mentioned the rarity of the item Mark intended to use as payment. Yet, he actually had three and Mark was still unfazed about giving the three crystals out. By his behavior, it was very likely that he had more. Val Flora had never seen such a customer in her whole life. Day 150 to 2:45 a.m. Forest Area, Military Outpost, Santo Domingo Elementary School, Barangay Santo Domingo, Municipality of Verac, Catanduanes. Val Flora received the shock of her life in this meeting. As Mark handed his down payment to her, she received the item with her shaking hands. A single small crystal to have a value equivalent to 1,000 kilos of gold bars. It was an extremely valued item. However, the price was not the crucial thing here, but the rarity of something that was not supposed to exist in the current times. With the crystals in her hand, Val Flora moved the crystals in front of Odessa. The wise owl then began to judge the value of the crystals. To her surprise once more, the crystal with a similar size to the first one had the exact same value. It was as if the crystals were mass-produced. On the other hand, the small crystal was priced at 76,000 points. The value of the three crystals was far more than enough as a down payment. Receiving the intended payment, Val Flora took a deep breath, returning to her business behavior. The value of the items exceeded the intended down payment. Is it fine for the exceeding points to reflect into the final price of the information? Val Flora asked. If not, I can establish a temporary point account in which you can store the remaining points. Is that point account similar to a bank account? Mark inquired. Rather than a bank account, it is more of a point storage for future transactions. Val Flora answered. It is a service open to VIPs and possible long-term clients. Mark nodded, understanding the explanation. Then, just reflect it to the price of information I needed. If you wish. Val Flora vowed. With the transaction between information gatherer, Val Flora, and the client Mark, had been finalized. Val Flora then put her left hand on the mark on her neck once more, causing it to glow. At the same time, the wise owl Odessa flew off from Val Flora's shoulder and circled above her. It was when a large feather from Odessa's wings fell in front of Val Flora, who caught the feather calmly. Please, accept this. Val Flora handed the feather to Mark as Odessa landed on her shoulder once more. Put a drop of blood on the feather, and it will serve as the proof for this transaction. Being told that, Mark received the feather from Val Flora. Without hesitation, he let a drop of his blood trickle onto the feather. Crackle. Suddenly, the feather released red sparks like an electrical appliance that suddenly short-circuited. That even obviously caused Val Flora to panic a little, although she tried her best not to show it. She only heaved a sigh of relief after the sparks were gone and the mark of the organization appeared on the feather with a golden glow. That's not supposed to happen, right? Mark turned to Val Flora. Dropping blood to the feather should only make the mark appear. Only the red sparks are unexpected. Val Flora explained. Your blood might be special for such a reaction to happen. I see. Mark played with another drop of his blood, feigning curiosity on his face. Don't you think it might be because I'm a demon? No. Val Flora shook her head. We had transactions with different kinds of races. Only people with special blood are likely to cause an unexpected reaction like that. Hearing that, Mark shrugged. He did not want to continue with the topic and expose himself in the process. Anyway, since I already gave the down payment, how long will it take for me to get the information? Mark changed the topic. My apologies, but the scope of your request started from 6 years ago. It would be hard to estimate the time frame. Val Flora replied. Mark understood that, even with a worldwide information network, it would not be easy to trace things all the way from 6 years ago. Nonetheless, Mark was not rushing. Then, how can I check if the information I wanted is ready? Mark asked another question. Here, Val Flora pointed at the feather on Mark's hand. There's no need to find me. As your commissioned agent, I will find you instead. There was no need for more explanation. Mark understood what Val Flora was implying. So, this feather also serves as a tracker. In a sense, yes. Val Flora replied. Normally, we would ask our clients if they wanted such service. However, we did not have such luxury at the moment. I believe you also know that. Mark nodded. This transaction was abrupt anyway. Furthermore, Mark would not have much time to check every now and then. It would be better if the results were delivered to him instead when it was ready. Of course, there was the risk that came alongside this situation. After all, Val Flora would be able to know his location at times. However, as Mark could not detect any hostility from Val Flora, he began to think that there would be no risk this time around. Furthermore, Val Flora's group was afraid of Mark. It was seen when Felix immediately fled with a melon after his threat. In any case, Mark was now their client and someone with a fat wallet. They would definitely not want to lose such a client that could provide rare items. Although there was a chance that Val Flora would double-cross him in this deal, it was rather low considering the confidence that she and Felix showed towards their organization. Anyway, it was not like Mark was afraid of being double-crossed by these people. So we are done here, right? Mark asked. If you had no other commissions to give, then yes. Val Flora nodded. Then, I'll go first. I'll be waiting for the information. Mark said as he bid goodbye. By the way, here's something for you. I don't know what you guys are planning on this island, but it's likely that I will end up standing on your way. So here's some compensation. Mark suddenly threw something at Val Flora in which she hurriedly caught in surprise. He then vanished in a puff of black smoke, which Val Flora did not expect to happen. Val Flora stared at the place where Mark stood before. She tried sensing the surroundings if Mark was still around, but she could not find any trace. Knowing that Mark actually left, Val Flora's straight back and shoulders drooped. I feel drained. Val Flora complained before turning to her wise owl. Odessa, you can return now. As Val Flora commanded, Odessa flew off from her shoulder. Val Flora then tapped the mark on her neck, causing the summoning magic circle to appear once more. There, the wise owl flew and entered the magic circle before vanishing. I should call for retrieval of the payment and send other information gatherers for this task. Val Flora said, looking at the 3 crystals and folded page of a notebook in her hand. She then looked at her other hand. It was the thing that Mark threw to her before leaving. Looking at the item, she did not know how to react anymore. Mark actually threw another pure energy crystal at her for compensation. Was he being generous or not? Val Flora could not tell. In any case, it was confirmed that Mark might tip the power balance on the island soon. In that case, they would likely fail their other mission and would not be able to do anything to prevent it. In any case, the value of this crystal was far exceeding the cost of failure. With this, there was no need to struggle. They might as well cancel the mission, return the payment to the political faction, and also pay the penalty. Even after all those, there would still be a hefty sum for them to share. As it appeared, Mark was not heartless to his possible allies. What a mysterious guy, Val Flora said as she made her way back to the outpost. This time, she was not in a hurry and took her time to relax along the way. As Roach said, Mark was a dangerous person. Now, Val Flora could attest to that. The pressure around him while talking alone was quite intense, even for her that was trained since childhood. In the least, it was good that Mark was not their enemy at this point. Finishing the deal, Mark returned to the outpost. He was in a good mood since one of the things he was worried about finally had some progress. Furthermore, the progress was not just a small step but possibly a large one. If it went well, there was also a possibility of locating all the remaining inheritors in one go. There was no way that Mark would not feel even a little bit of happiness in this scenario. After all, Freed was literally his benefactor. His wish was one of the priorities that Mark had now. As Mark returned, he expected May to be awake once more. Well, she was. However, it seemed that she was lying down inside the tent, trying to go back to sleep. Mark could not help but smile. His beautiful wife was sulking. Well, it was not like May was against him leaving her side now and then. She only wanted Mark to tell her if he was going out. On the other hand, Mark did not want to disturb her sleep just to tell her that he would be going out. Thus, it ended up in this situation. Mark shrugged and entered the tent. Surely, May knew that he was already there, but she was not opening her eyes at all, feigning to sleep deeply. With a smile, Mark laid down beside May. And then, gave May a kiss on her forehead. May did not show any movement. She was still feigning to be in deep sleep. However, her face was already red from Mark's action. Sleep already. Mark caressed May's hair. We still have a lot to do tomorrow. May opened her eyes, pouting. Then, she embraced Mark, even tighter than the previous 2 times this night. Finally, she went back to sleep while Mark also took a bit of a nap. Day 150 to 7:14 a.m. Military Outpost, Santo Domingo Elementary School, Barangay Santo Domingo, Municipality of Verac, Catanduanes. The sun rose once more in the apocalyptic world. Outside the Santo Domingo military outpost, a lot of people were gathered by the gates. Those people were no other than the workers that were saved from the hands of the anti-government faction of the rebels. Among them, there was also General Padilla's entourage. They were all here to bid farewell to Mark's group that was already climbing up Chaflar's back. For the last time, the workers conveyed their gratitude to Mark's group for the new leash in life. The world might be harsh at its current state, but they still had the hope which Mark's group gave to them. Even though Mark and Val Flora met last night, the two did not even try to show any sign of deep familiarity. It was the right conduct considering the circumstances. It did not take long that Mark's group were done with their preparations. Soon, on Chalfar's back, they flew off, towards the mountains to the north. Even after Mark's group flew away, the workers did not leave immediately. They watched the silhouette of the flying dragon until they could not see it anymore as it flew over the trees and hills. Only when the silhouette of Chaflar could not be seen anymore was when the workers left. They also had to do their own preparations. Like Mark's group, they also needed to leave the outpost together with the general's convoy. They would be starting their new life in the Catanduanes military settlement in Codon. Day 150 to 12:41 p.m. Military Settlement, Codon, Municipality of San Andres, Catanduanes. Lunchtime came in the military settlement. But instead of eating lunch, many soldiers were busy preparing things. The general's convoy had just arrived with more than 100 refugees. Although the preparations started last night after confirming the number of refugees, the time they had was still not enough to prepare dwellings for those people. Usually, they would only create a tent area for the new refugees. They would use small camping tents since the refugees only needed places to sleep. The other facilities were already provided by the military. However, it was different this time. For some unknown reason, General Padilla ordered the living spaces to be properly made this time. It was the reason why the soldiers were now setting up larger tarpaulin tents. These tents had 2-meter by 2-meter space. It was enough for a small family to live in. However, it did not end there, was each tent was placed with a double-size folding bed and mattress. This large-scale development sparked the curiosity of everyone in the settlement. Soon, the news about the refugees spread out to everyone. Their sudden arrival led to different opinions from the populace, both good and bad. And the obvious difference in treatment of these refugees from the military caused most of the negative ones. Some people were happy to see that there were still survivors on the island. Unfortunately, it was only a minority. More people were concerned instead. After all, before these new refugees could adapt to the life inside the settlement, they would need to rely on the military for food and other necessities. As such, the supplies would take a hit for the sudden influx of people. Furthermore, there would be more work for the people in charge of taking care of people that were yet to be capable of taking care of themselves in the settlement. However, the previous issues were not the gravest circumstances. The greater issue was the obvious difference in treatment of the new refugees compared to the previous ones. In fact, there were still a number of refugees still living in small tents as they were incapable of working for a living in the apocalypse. For example, people with disabilities, orphan children, and the elderly that did not have any remaining relatives. There were still a lot of people relying on the military's compassion to keep living. For the newcomers to have a more privileged treatment would definitely impact those people. It was the military that controlled the settlement. Thus, none of the bottom feeders dared voice their complaints about the situation. Nonetheless, it did not mean that some people would not use this to their advantage. General Padilla. What is happening? The people are already spreading rumors about this unfair treatment. An angry voice could be heard shouting inside the office of General Padilla. The army general had just returned to his office after the tiring travel. It was not exaggerated that he was very tired. Yesterday, they rushed a convoy to Santo Domingo outpost. At night, they had a meeting with Mark. After about only 3 hours of sleep, they had to wake up early. They had to see Mark off and prepare to bring the refugees back to the settlement. Then, there was another hour of travel on the danger-stricken road. General Padilla's eyes were already droopy. He was not getting any younger as time passed by. And yet, here he was, listening to someone's complaints with a shrug. "General, are you listening?" The soldier in front of the general asked aggressively. General Padilla looked at the man. If he was not trying to maintain his image and status, he might have ordered his men to throw this garbage out of the room. The soldier complaining inside General Padilla's office was Colonel Sergimiano Sabino. Being a general from the army, none of his subordinates would have the guts to complain like this. And that was right. Colonel Sabino was not from the Philippine Army but from the Marines. In fact, he was the late Marines general's right-hand man. Now that the Marines general was dead, the Marines were now following the instructions of General Padilla. However, it did not mean that they were already under him. Now, being the second in command of the Marines in this settlement, Colonel Sabino had the guts and position to complain about the circumstances. The worst thing about this guy, however, was that he was extremely cunning. Colonel Sabino was against General Padilla for sure. However, he was not doing it like how the Marines General Segura faced the Army General directly. Instead, Colonel Sabino would only move with rational things that were hard to refute or would not put him in a tight spot. Right now, Colonel Sabino was taking advantage of the complaints of the populace. Being on the side of the populace, it would be hard for General Padilla to just push away this guy without any answer. If General Padilla did such a thing, it would not take long for it to reach the people, and he would lose face. This was how this colonel worked. With a sigh, General Padilla stared at Colonel Sabino. "I know what you are getting at," General Padilla replied. However, this situation could not be helped. "General, what do you mean?" Colonel Sabino cried out. "The people are complaining about this unfair treatment and you say that it could not be helped." General Padilla glared at the colonel. He was getting annoyed with this person since the start. Going back to the past, a lot of the things that the deceased Marines general did had Colonel Sabino lurking in the background. However, Colonel Sabino always worked clean. It was hard to make him take responsibility, especially since he mostly avoided direct involvement in those activities. In short, this Colonel Sabino was a cunning bastard. If there would be no repercussions, General Padilla would not mind eliminating this guy. If there was no evidence, then make one. The armed forces of the Philippines were not spotlessly clean. Such things happen every now and then. Colonel Sabino, you already heard who took down the Antis and rescued the captives, right? General Padilla replied to the colonel's question. The very same person requested the new refugees to receive this treatment. He even offered mutagen stones in exchange. Are you saying that it's because of that criminal that killed General Segura? Colonel Sabino bellowed. General Padilla, you are still cooperating with that criminal. General Padilla could not help but frown. Yes, by law, he is a criminal by killing a military official. But you should remember, General Segura is the same. You know that, right? Besides, that law is in the past. Right now, we won't even hesitate to cooperate with the former rebels. You know that our situation is already dire. Offending a person that can kill an infected that we can't even imagine killing won't do us any good. Colonel Sabino frowned back at the general. Without saying anything else, he stormed out of General Padilla's office and slammed the door. With the Marines colonel out of the scene, General Padilla finally relaxed on his chair, pinching the bridge of his nose. Seriously, how troublesome. The general complained. General, are you really letting that bastard from the Marines prance around like a clown?
Andrew, who was doing his best to hold himself back, asked the general.
Calm yourself down, Andrew. The general replied. Colonel Sabino is more useful alive than dead. With him around, it is easier to monitor the remaining lackeys of General Segura since they are all gathering under him.
It was true. After General Segura and his brother died at the hands of Mark while the influence of the Marines grew smaller, there were still those that were loyal to him. Most of those people were now gathering under Colonel Sabino.
That man is good at acting. Vanessa commented to the side. What do you mean, Vanessa? Andrew asked. Colonel Sabino is just acting. He's not here to complain about the situation but is trying to get information from our mouths. After all, we never disclosed why we are taking better care of the new refugees. Now that he got what he wanted, he left.
It was General Padilla that replied to Andrew's question. Then, General, you knew? Andrew was surprised. Yet, you told him the reason?
To Andrew's question, the general nodded. You must be thinking why. General Padilla added. Actually, I'm also curious as to why Mark would pay too much care about the refugees. There is a possibility that he is lying about the deaths of his family members and just did not want us to know. There is also the chance that among the refugees were his relatives. Of course, we had no evidence.
However, we also had no evidence that what Mark said is true. But why would he not take them away if they were among the refugees? Andrew asked an obvious question. I also don't know why. General Padilla shook his head. But you know one thing, Andrew? You're not there so you did not see it, but none of the refugees knew Mark's face. He appeared to be wearing a mask all the while he was with them. Even if his family is among the refugees, it is likely that they did not recognize Mark. In the first place, it was very suspicious for Mark to attack the rebels and rescue the refugees. You know that, right? The general added. Andrew could only nod hearing those words. That Mark does look like someone who would not bother saving useless people at all. Andrew affirmed his image of Mark. That is right. General Padilla agreed. It's likely that he helped us with the horde because we will fall in debt to him. But for the refugees, it was impossible for them to serve him any purpose. And yet, he went all the way to the Santo Domingo outpost to escort them to safety.
That was right. Mark's actions were totally odd. However, the truth and the lies were hard to determine. Furthermore, as the officer in charge of this settlement, and a person in debt for their help, I'm not in a concrete position to search for the truth. General Padilla explained. In that case, I won't be able to conduct an investigation without getting in Mark's bad side. I'm sure that none of us would want that. At this point, Andrew came to a realization. Then, General, you baited Colonel Sabino to do the investigation instead. General Padilla nodded. Sooner or later, after we cracked down and took control of the remains of Segura's faction, that colonel would not be of use anymore. We can focus on finding faults in him and take him down from his position. If possible, get rid of him to avoid future issues. When we do that, we will come across Colonel Sabino's investigations, and it could not be helped if we learned the details. What a clever plan. Making dirtying another person's hand while reaping the benefits after. Vanessa secretly commended General Padilla for his plan. However, as an information gatherer herself, she knew that it would not be easy. Even for her, if she wanted to get that same information, it would take a long while. Why? Vanessa recognized that Mark put several layers of deceit in his moves. Although it was clear in her eyes that Mark was hiding something, it would be hard to determine what it was. There might also be the possibility that everything that Mark did was to deceive the eyes of those people that had ideas against him. In any case, General Padilla was not a clean person himself. It was a good reason why Mark would not trust him. Furthermore, if the general's circumstances in the past came to light, a lot of people would lose trust in him. Day 150 to 1:23 p.m. Cristales Noticias Cetus Hideout, Catanduanes Military Settlement, Codon, Municipality of San Andres, Catanduanes. While the military was busy with their matters, the hideout of the CNC in this settlement still stood unnoticed. Inside one of the rooms, Amelin, the leader of the anti-government faction of the rebels, opened her eyes for the first time since they escaped from their base. Of course, the moment she opened her eyes, confusion overwhelmed her because of the unfamiliar surroundings. Furthermore, the surroundings were quite dark. Amelin could tell that she was inside a room, but there was barely any light coming in for her to see clearly. Click. Amelin heard a clicking sound, making her turn her head. That was when she saw the door open. With the light coming from the door, the only thing she could see was a dark figure of a person. Nonetheless, it was a familiar silhouette. As I felt, you're already awake. The usual happy-go-lucky voice of Felix entered Amelin's ears. After hearing his voice, Amelin tried to sit on the bed. But then, Amelin let out a painful voice. Don't get up yet, Felix spoke, stopping Amelin from getting up. You might seem fine outside, but your insides are pretty messed up. While saying those words, Felix approached the bedside table and started lighting up a match. That was when Amelin noticed the oil lamp beside the bed that Felix was now lighting up. That made Amelin look at the window. From the lights seeping in from the tiny gaps, it was very likely that it was midday outside. Yet, here Felix was, lighting up an oil lamp instead of opening the windows. Amelin watched Felix. She wanted to talk, but she was unable to do so because the pain from trying to get up had yet to subside. Don't push yourself. Felix flicked Amelin's forehead. Even if you can withstand all those rockets, who the hell told you to take on them head on? Amelin winced at that flick. It was uncalled for. The muscles all over her body were aching. Like Felix said when he entered, her insides were messed up. Although Amelin's ice armor managed to protect her from the rockets that the traitors fired. However, it did not mean that she was able to go unscathed. Her armor took the brunt of the impact, along with the shrapnel from explosions. Still, the impact and shockwaves rattled her muscles and organs. At that time, she was too angry, and her adrenaline was on high levels to notice it all. It was good that Amelin was a mutator with an enhanced body. Any regular person that would have suffered the same circumstances would have died soon. Finally, the pain subsided for the most part. Being careful of her movements, Amelin finally managed to open her mouth. Quote. Where are we? Don't be surprised, all right. Felix replied. We're currently inside the military settlement. Wah. Of course, Amelin would be surprised even if Felix warned her. She's literally inside the enemy base. I told you not to get surprised. Seriously, you're always agitated. Felix complained. We already observed that mutators had some odd changes in their personalities after they became one, but why did you have to become like this? You're better the way you were before. Amelin looked at Felix, who was scratching his head in frustration. She could not understand what this guy was talking about. In any case, don't worry. We're not captured or something. Felix continued. This the hideout of our organization here. We'll be safe here as long as no one recognized us. That's why the windows are closed. Organization. Amelin managed to squeeze out a question. Oh right. This is the first time I've told you this, didn't I? Felix smiled playfully. Well, it's some sort of worldwide organization. I'll tell you more about it later after you recover. Just rest for now, alright? Ah, you must be hungry. I'll get you some easy to eat food. With those words, Felix playfully stormed out of the room and closed the door. Amelin stared at the door filled with questions. She had long been with Felix since she lost her family. Although he had been too mysterious, she did not bother asking since he was the only one that supported him when she lost it all. Now that Felix himself brought it up, Amelin could not help but raise the questions she had all this time in her mind. Unfortunately, she was not in the best condition to ask questions and listen to the answers. In any case, Amelin was still agitated. Since she was here, it meant that her faction was already done for. More than that, at the hands of a single person. The worst of it all, Amelin was currently recuperating inside the enemy territory. Tisk. I'll kill you soon, UFC King General. Amelin murmured in an almost inaudible voice. She already woke up. As Felix reached the living room, a woman's voice asked him. What are you doing here? Shouldn't you be working beside that general? Felix asked back. He did not expect to see Vanessa at this point. It seemed that she returned while he was checking on Amelin. General Padilla cleared his afternoon schedule, so I also managed to get a break until tomorrow. These past days had been too busy. Vanessa said, stretching her back. Where is Roach? Felix asked while instructing their maid to prepare some soup for Amelin. I sent him out, Vanessa replied. I told him to contact the others and warn them. Warn them for what? Felix frowned. Are you hiding something? I'm not really hiding it. Vanessa shrugged. It's just that Sir Mark had other plans on this island. It's likely that we'll end up failing our deal with the political group. In that case, I want the others to know not to do anything to obstruct him or put themselves in danger. What are you talking about? Felix was confused. I know we are no match for that guy, but shouldn't we at least try to stop him? If we fail, not only we will have to return the payment, but we will have to pay a penalty, you know that. No worries, Vanessa replied in a relaxed manner. I got a good commission. The penalty was also reimbursed with far more than the supposed value. Huh. Felix was even more confused. You got a commission. From who? Wait, why are you addressing that courier with, Sir? Sir Mark is my client, so why not? Vanessa explained. Besides, he gave me a big commission and gave compensation for our mission that is going to fail. Are you serious? Felix was frozen. I won't ask for the specifics of the commission since it's not allowed, but how much? The commission had a down payment of 250,000. The compensation he gave is 100,000 points. Vanessa replied. Then, there was silence. Vanessa turned to Felix only to see him looking at her incredulously. What's wrong? Did your screws finally fell out? You're not joking, right? Felix asked. Do you think I'm joking? Vanessa asked back. I think you're not. Felix sat down on the sofa. You're not the type to joke around. If you did, it means you're in a good mood. Scratching his head, Felix stared at Vanessa with a frown. *T. I'm the one that introduced us to him. Why didn't he give me that commission instead? Damn. 250. Just what the hell did you pay you? Don't ask. You idiot. You know that unless it's a group commission, most of the details are confidential. Vanessa warned. Besides, with what happened before, I doubt he would be hiring you at all. Felix fell silent. It was true that his meeting with Mark was an unpleasant occasion. It was already good that Mark was not completely hostile. Still, 100,000 points as compensation, huh? We only had to return the 40,000 points that Ms. Marcos paid us and another 20,000 as a penalty. There's still an extra 40 for all of us to share, huh? Not bad at all, considering we only accepted it as an extra job. It seemed that Felix was also fine with Mark's compensation, albeit regretful that he was not the one that got that huge transaction. All that aside, what are you planning with that woman? Leaving the topic, Vanessa asked Felix about a melon. After we get to kill her main target, I plan on making her join us. Felix declared. Though by her current temperament, she can only go as a mercenary. I guess that's good. Vanessa agreed. After most people succeeded in their revenge, they become nothing as empty shells and their lives lose direction. It would be a pity for someone you raised to end up like that. That's right. Felix nodded. In any case, it won't happen soon. She needed to recover first and I still need to make the best stage for her. Seriously, why didn't you adopt her as your daughter since you're acting like her father? Vanessa complained. Well, it will be odd since she looks older than you. You talk like you're young, yourself. Felix said, only to receive a fierce glare from Vanessa. With that, Felix shut his mouth and ran away after he received the soup for a melon. Seriously, that guy. Vanessa sighed at Felix. He had no delicacy towards women at all. It was not like Felix was lying, however. Vanessa, also known as Val Flora, had an appearance of a beautiful woman in her early 30s. However, her actual age was far older than that. It was not like she belonged to any long-lived race. It was her unique physique that stopped her body from aging. In fact, in their group that was currently in Catanduanes, it was neither Felix nor Val Flora that was the youngest. It was actually Roach, who was the youngest even though he looks like the oldest because of his face and muscular body. Day 150 to 2:11 p.m. Bagong Bayan, Municipality of Panganiban, Catanduanes. We're finally here, Emika shouted, seeing the town that was supposed to be the meeting place of the group. The municipality of Panganiban was the next municipality north of Viga where the main base of the anti-government faction of the rebels was located. That was why their designated meeting place was literally further north of the rebel base. Why was this place chosen? It was because, in this area, almost all the longest roads that travel across Catanduanes intersected. It was a good place to set up an outpost if one wanted to monitor the roads for people passing by. Well, it was not like anything other than evolved animals would pass through. Soon, Mark's group saw the others inside the school north of the town. They were not hard to spot considering they had a huge bird with them, the Thunderbird Trua. You guys took your time. Pafile complained immediately after Mark's group landed. He seemed to be in a foul mood. What's wrong? Mark asked. We just got delayed for a whole night. Boss, Edsel interjected. We've been waiting here for a whole day and a half already. That's odd. Mark was confused. How come? If they went for the estimated time, Pafile's group would need a day at least to escort the refugees in their group to the base of the neutral faction of the rebels. It was odd since if they had been waiting here for a day and a half already, it meant that they returned the very same night of the day they took down the anti-government faction. Soon, Mark learned the reason. He could not help but scratch his head. Apparently, Pafile's group had an unexpected encounter 2 hours after leaving the rebel base. They crossed with a convoy of armed people along the road. Unexpectedly, it was actually a convoy from the neutral faction that was there to pick up the refugees and invite their saviors to their base as guests. The saviors were no other than Pafile's group, of course. Without hesitation, Pafile turned down the invitation. They had no reason to accept it at all. Instead, it was good that they finished their task early. Sighing, Mark asked, "It's my mother, isn't it?" Should be, Paphile replied. There was a woman with the armed men, who was called Mom by the girl you told me to protect at all cost. Sure enough, Mark did not put this into account. It looked like that their mother managed to foresee the situation about his sister and set out in advance. In any case, it was good. Boss, what are we going to do next? Barrick asked. It looked like he already embraced his role as a member of Mark's group. Nothing today and tomorrow. Mark shrugged. You guys managed to rest, but we haven't yet. We are going to take a break before setting off to eliminate the demons in Bado. With that, Mark was looking forward to a good rest. Well, he was still fine for the most part. However, it did not mean that the girls were too. They should at least need a break. Day 150 to 1:48 p.m., Panganaban Central Elementary School, Bagong Bayan, Municipality of Panganaban, Catanduanes. Deciding to take a day and a half break, Mark's group finally had the opportunity to relax. Mark sat on the foot of the staircase of one of the school buildings. He was observing the scene in front of him. This school seemed to be a decent one. Compared to Queen's Row Elementary School, the grade school Mark attended in the past, this place may not have more buildings, but it was a far larger school. By his estimate, 2 Queen's Row Elementary schools could fit in the plot of land the Panganaban Central Elementary School had. There might be a lot of students that attended this school. But now, the whole place was empty and dilapidated. From what it appeared, the school became an evacuation center. Since the outbreak started during Christmas break, schools were supposed to be empty. However, there were a lot of traces of human inhabitation in this place, albeit old.
There were destroyed tents on the school grounds. A lot of trash was also left behind.
And, of course, the stains of blood in the walls along with the traces left by the assailants. By how it appeared, it was not the infected that devastated this place. It was either evolved animals, or worse, demons. Mark looked up, detecting his connection with Ignis. The demon sword was flying in the sky, from the southeast direction of the town. And from how it felt like, Crimson was also with Ignis. He began to wonder why he did not see these two here when his group arrived. Ignis stopped in front of Mark. Crimson also materialized, bouncing off from Ignis, blade towards Mark like a child. Mark immediately caught Crimson in his hands. Where did you two go? Mark asked while poking Crimson's jelly-like body. Master, welcome back. The voice of Ignis echoed inside Mark's head. We found some settlers in the southeast side of the town, so we investigated a bit. Settlers. That's odd. Mark tapped his chin, thinking. Yes, I thought the same, Master. Ignis replied. Even Crimson agreed, bouncing on Mark's palms. Considering this place is not too far from the Antes base, it's surprising that there are settlers. Mark surmised. Are you sure that they are just normal settlers and not members of the rebels? I thought that at first too, Master, Ignis replied. However, I dropped the thought when I saw that they only had cold weapons with them, not a single firearm. Furthermore, Mark asked as Ignis paused. We weren't able to go close to observe them closer. When we tried to approach, the settlers immediately detected us. We can only flee. Even when Crimson is his miasma form. Mark asked once more. Yes, unexpectedly. Ignis shook as he replied. They can't see Crimson, but they were searching around the area where he was even when he moves around. Crimson also bounced several times, understanding what Ignis was saying. Strange. Mark nodded. You two can't tell whether they are humans or not. Hard to say, Master, Ignis replied. They all looked humans, so I needed to come close to confirm. But you can't. Yes, unfortunately. And Crimson can move close to them, but this little guy can't distinguish the difference without attacking them first. Mark frowned. He did not expect to come across something like this when he decided to take a break. By the way, you two can understand each other? Mark asked, noticing that Ignis and Crimson seemed to understand each other while talking to him. This was the first time he saw this happen. Master, Ignis spoke. I think we are able to since I became your demon sword. It's just we didn't have any chance to notice it since Crimson always hid in the shadows. But Ignis, Mark tilted his head. You can't understand the other blood children, right? Maybe it is because the two of us had the closest connection to you, Master, Ignis explained. I'm your contracted demon sword while Crimson shared your blood and miasma. Mark fell silent. It was surprising that Ignis and Crimson could actually understand each other. Of course, understanding did not mean a complete conversation. As it appeared, Crimson could not understand everything that Ignis was saying, considering that he was just a baby at mind. Also, because of Crimson's age, it was easy for Ignis to understand his simple thoughts even if he could not speak. In any case, this was a good discovery. Since the two could converse to some extent, it would be easier to send the two together for scouting things. It would be safer for the two if they went in pairs. It's good that we now know this. Mark patted Crimson. Still, we should check those people the day after tomorrow. We're taking a break, so you two should relax too. Before Ignis and Crimson could reply, however, Mark suddenly turned his head as he sensed someone suddenly popping out behind him. You don't have to check on them. Those are good people. A sweet voice entered their ears from where Mark was looking. There, a woman in a white dress and flower crown stood. Behind her were a few black children that were the ones likely to be the cause of the woman suddenly appearing out of nowhere. Seeing the woman, Mark sighed. Grandmother, what are you doing here? The woman that appeared was no other than Mark's ancestor, Aaliyah. Can't I come to see my grandchild? Aaliyah smiled. This area is within Dewata Araya's territory, so she knew what is happening around here. Actually, we detected an unfamiliar presence of Atomawo. That's why we've been watching his group since they entered the area. We didn't expect that he's part of your group, though. Hearing that, Mark understood. The mountain he ended up exiting when he left Dewata Araya's domain was not too far from here. It was not surprising that this fell into her territory and was able to observe the events here with the abilities of the spirits. What are those people, anyway? Mark asked, changing the topic. They are half demons. They were descendants of demons from human partners. However, they did not turn into demons and retained humanity, albeit having abilities from their demon parents and ancestors. Hearing the words of his grandmother, several thoughts entered Mark's mind. He remembered that in some pieces of Japanese literature, otaku-oriented or not, half-races were utterly subjected to spite of pure-blooded races. Are they exiled by demons because they are just failed offsprings? Mark asked. Exiled? No. Aaliyah approached Mark and sat beside him. Those poor souls are people who escaped. Demons are not nice enough to just exile them. Most half-demons are killed immediately after the ritual that was supposed to turn them into demons failed. Don't they turn into feral demons if the demonification ritual failed? Mark asked another. Did you encounter feral demons already? I did. I captured 3. Mark pointed at the room they cleared to store their baggage. My grandchild managed to capture 3. Aaliyah looked at Mark with worry. It's good that you're alright. Feral demons are hard to deal with because they hunt in groups and had various uncanny abilities. About the ritual, Aaliyah added. The ritual that creates feral demons is different from what human descendants of demons usually take. Turning normal humans into demons, that is the demoniciation ritual. As for demon descendants that already showed demonic abilities since birth, they undergo an awakening ritual. I see. Mark nodded. It looks like what I know is incomplete. Mark frowned. Sure enough, not all the memories he got from the souls he absorbed were reliable. In the first place, his source of information he got was the memories of the Elder Cultivator and the deity of bloodshed. One was a human cultivator, and the other was a formless demon. Both had no concrete experience or first-hand knowledge of demonic rituals and such. While Mark and his grandmother were talking, Crimson was bouncing on Mark's palms, curious about Aaliyah. What a cute child. Aaliyah smiled. But what kind of creature is this? Aaliyah poked Crimson, causing the blood child to jiggle. It seemed that it was comfortable of Aaliyah's touch and actually jumped to her lap. The black children panicked. While they could not sense the miasma in Crimson's body, the blood child was still an unknown creature to them. Fortunately, Aaliyah did not mind and actually patted Crimson like she was facing a cute small animal. At this moment, someone entered the scene, making Mark turn to the door of the building behind him. Gerger. Who? May asked, seeing the woman sitting beside Mark, who had an exotic-looking beauty. I told you about her the other night. Mark smiled at May. Mayor. This is my grandmother, Aaliyah. Hearing Mark's introduction, May's eyes turned wide. It was too sudden for her, after all. Flustered, May turned around, fixing her hair and wiping her face. She looked a bit haggard since she was preparing lunch with Pearl. My grandchild, are you not going to introduce her to me? Aaliyah smiled at May's behavior. Who is she? Your girlfriend. Seeing May all flustered, Mark smiled with a sigh. He stood up and approached her. Since she was panicking, instead of fixing herself, she was turning herself more into a mess. This was the very first time Mark saw May like this. She did not even flinch while fighting the infected, but she was about to have a heart attack just meeting his grandmother. Let me help, Mark said, combing May's hair with his hand. When done, Mark turned the stiff May around. Grandmother, this is May. My wife. Hearing the introduction, Aaliyah stood and approached the two. She then started to observe May closely like she was examining a piece of art. May, who could not even establish proper eye contact, could only look down with a reddened face. She was all embarrassed and flustered that she did not know what to do anymore. Aaliyah nodded. Looks like you got an outstanding wife. No, she's far more than outstanding, Mark argued. The conversation of the two made May even redder. Mark and Aaliyah were smiling. The two were both teasing May because of her reaction. What is happening here? Unfortunately, the teasing could not continue. Barrick suddenly appeared, confused at the atmosphere between the three. Furthermore, his eyes fell on Aaliyah and the black children, noticing that they were not humans. What's wrong? Mark turned to Barrick and asked. The food is ready, and the miss did not return with you immediately, so they sent me to check. Barrick replied. As it appeared, May was here to call Mark for lunch. However, she was caught up with the situation, forgetting what she came here for. Turning back at May, Mark almost let out a laugh. He gently pinched May's cheek. Relax, grandmother is not going to eat you, you know. But, May replied, sneaking a look at Aaliyah. Finally, Aaliyah could not help but burst out laughing. She then gave May an embrace. Don't be too stiff. Do I look like a monster to you? Aaliyah asked, and May shook her head in reply. Then relax. Mark sighed. It was fun to tease May, but she looked too pitiful panicking like this. Here, Mark smiled gently, patting May's head with his hand covered in a white glow. Without surprise, May calmed down. However, Aaliyah released May from her embrace with a surprised look as she stared at Mark. Is there something wrong? Mark asked, noticing Aaliyah's unsteady emotions. Aaliyah did not reply. Instead, she raised her hand in front of her, showing it to Mark. It was when Mark became the one surprised, especially when Aaliyah's hand was covered in a white, milky glow. Who would not be surprised, considering Mark had been always bothered by what in the world was this ability of his, capable of soothing and comforting people he embraced and touched. Day 150 to 2:05 p.m., Faculty, Damaso D. Salvador Building, Panganiban Central Elementary School, Bagong Bayan, Municipality of Panganiban, Catanduanes. Inside the office that appeared to be the teacher's faculty, everyone gathered to have lunch. Lining up office tables side by side and taking the non-broken chairs from other rooms, they created a dining area enough for everyone to eat. Aaliyah's sudden arrival surprised everyone. None of them expected Mark's ancestor they heard about the other day to appear before them without notice. The only ones feeling strange were the young soldiers, Geronimo and Padua. After all, They were still new in Mark's group and had not heard about Mark's encounter with Aaliyah. Furthermore, the two were new to the mysterious things around Mark's group. At first, they could not believe that the young-looking Aaliyah was not just Mark's grandmother but his ancestor far in the past. If not for the black children with Aaliyah, the two would not believe that Aaliyah was not human anymore. And because of Aaliyah's presence, the dining table was mostly silent. It was not like they were uncomfortable with Aaliyah being there to share lunch with them. Their curiosity was not the issue either. The problem was they could not help but stare at her because she gobbled her food like a hungry ghost. Aaliyah did not even bother touching her spoon and fork. She was using her hands to eat instead. It was like how it was back in the past when the people in the Philippines were nothing but primitive tribes. Of course, there were still people in modern times that preferred to eat using bare hands. It was said to bring out the flavor of some local cuisines. Nonetheless, the way Aaliyah ate was like she never really used a spoon and fork before. Gulp. Aaliyah paused, noticing that everyone's eyes were on her. Is something wrong? That question made everyone watching her awkward. They did not dare answer that question. Well, aside from someone. Grandmother, you looked like someone that hasn't eaten for decades. Mark said, making everyone turn at him for lacking courtesy. However, Aaliyah did not seem to mind. Sorry about this. Aaliyah wiped her lips and smiled. I haven't really eaten cooked human food for decades. All we had at home are raw fruits, flowers, and vegetables. Everyone fell silent at Aaliyah's reply. Who would have thought that Mark's words would be spot on for the most part? Because of that, everyone went to eat without minding Aaliyah's behavior. Mark even took out some canned food for his grandmother to eat. It seemed that she really liked it. Having their fill, everyone went to do what they could. First was cleaning a room for Mark's group to stay the night. It did not take long since they only needed to sweep the dust in one of the rooms and add some temporary partitions. After that, everyone was free to do what they wanted. Edsel and Pearl decided to look around the school together. The two were both at high school age. The two were reminiscing the time they were still at school. Paphile, on the other hand, was lazing around. He found an overgrown tree near the entrance of the school. Then, he laid down on its thickest branch to sleep. As it seemed, it was also how he spent the rest of the time while waiting for Mark's group to arrive. As for Barrick, he decided to summon his weaker pets and groom them. He made sure not to cause too much magical fluctuation and avoided calling unto his stronger pets. The newest recruits, Geronimo and Padua, were yet to recover from the surprises in Mark's group. However, they knew that they were still not in the position to ask too many questions. Instead, the two decided to borrow some items from Mark. The two went and did some maintenance on their weapons. Amihan and Emika also decided to look around the school. It was good that Amihan was now able to play with other humans, even if it was just the little girls. The last ones were Mark's family members. Since it was quite awkward to do during lunch, Mark decided to properly introduce the little girls to their grandmother. They set up some chairs and a table outside the building under a tree. It was so that they could take a rest after lunch while enjoying the cold breeze outside. This is Iola, Abigail, and Miracle. Mark introduced the three to Aaliyah. Go on, greet your grandmother. The first one to step forward was Iola. My name is Iola. It's a pleasure to meet you, grandmother. It was a perfect introduction. It was too perfect that Aaliyah was not able to reply immediately and turned to Mark in askance. It was not the type of introduction that you would hear from a child. She's pretty mature, you see. Mark said with a bitter smile. Then, it is my pleasure to meet you too. Aaliyah smiled at Iola, patting her head gently. Next was Miracle, who curiously approached Aaliyah. I'm Miracle. Gra Grandmater. Miracle then embraced Aaliyah. It seemed the little girl was having a hard time pronouncing grandmother being a long word. Besides, it was already surprising to a seemingly 3-year-old to be able to introduce herself. Aaliyah returned the embrace and even lifted Miracle up in her arms. As for the last one, Abigail was not stepping forward. She was hiding behind Mark, peeking at Aaliyah. Sorry about this. Mark was also troubled. Abigail had a bad experience with her real grandmother. Hearing that, Aaliyah turned to Mark. As I thought. They are not your real daughters, right? Little miracle aside, Iola and Abigail's ages did not fit your wife's age. I also don't feel the familial attachment at first sight. To that question, Mark shrugged. Yeah, they are not. Mark patted Abigail's head. Though rather than me adopting them, it's more like they chose me to be their father. Aaliyah looked at Mark and glanced at the girls. Well, they are your daughters now, so they are also my granddaughters. Aaliyah smiled as she approached Mark. She then lowered her body at Abigail's eye level. Do I look scary? Aaliyah asked the little girl. Abigail did not speak but shook her head. If I'm not scary, then can you give grandmother a hug? Aaliyah asked another, putting down Miracle and opening her arms at Abigail. Abigail looked at Mark, not knowing what to do. However, when she saw Mark nod, she slowly went out of hiding and approached Aaliyah. The little girl was still hesitating. It was when Aaliyah took the initiative and caught Abigail in her arms. Caught you. Aaliyah laughed. Abigail was surprised and was about to try to escape. But then, a familiar sense of comfort began to calm her. The little girl could not help but calm down and turn at Mark in confusion. Mark shrugged. Aaliyah was being sly. Since it seemed that it would be hard for Abigail to open up, she just went and used it. The very same ability he had. It was the nameless ability that caused the little girls to ask him for hugs or head pats at any given opportunity. As Aaliyah showed before lunch, she had the same ability that he had. With the introductions done and Abigail calming down, they sat around the table. Unfortunately for Abigail, Aaliyah was not letting go of her. That was why she was now sitting on her grandmother's lap, getting some gentle head pats. It looks like you have a good family, Aaliyah said to Mark, satisfied with the family that her grandchild had. Still, there was something that bothers her. But how come that all of you were demons with the same aura? There are some unique circumstances, Mark replied. Possible, don't ask for now. Then, I won't ask. Aaliyah smiled. But be sure to tell me in the future. By the way, grandmother, Mark spoke. You also had this ability. But what is it? Mark then let his hand get covered with white, milky light. Looking at Mark's hand, Aaliyah had a nostalgic expression in her eyes. It is a power present in our tribe, Aaliyah replied. Back then, we call it relieving light. Aaliyah then began to tell the story. It was a story that circulated in the tribe even before Aaliyah was born. Tribes had a reason for existing. Some were families large enough to form a tribe. There were also those that gathered under the same banner in order to survive. As for the tribe that Aaliyah was born into, it began from faith. Apparently, the first tribe leader that Aaliyah belonged to came from a completely different tribe. Furthermore, the eldest son of the tribe, who was supposed to inherit the position of the tribe chief. However, the eldest son met a woman in the woods while hunting. Both of them started to meet from time to time after the first meeting and ended up falling in love with each other. Unfortunately, as the eldest son of the tribe and the next tribe chief, he was supposed to marry the daughter of the chief of an allied tribe. That was something that he went against with all his heart. Nonetheless, the tribe chief did not falter and insisted to follow the tradition. What he did not expect. The eldest son decided to abandon the tribe and left for the woman he loved. Life was harsh at that time. Angered, the tribe chief took his warriors to chase after his son. They needed to take his son back and kill the witch that seduced his son. It became a harsh fight as the eldest son did his best to protect his beloved woman. The tribe chief and his warriors tried their best not to harm the eldest son. However, one of the warriors, the second son of the tribe chief, had another goal. Without hesitation, the second son stabbed his spear at his elder brother, piercing his stomach. It was a fatal wound. That was when the frightened woman finally removed her disguise, despite the possibility that her existence might not be accepted by her beloved man. The woman was a young Dewata wearing a disguise of a human. The Dewata's anger almost killed the tribe chief and the warriors. It was when the dying man called unto her to stop and forgive his tribe, saying that he still loved her even if she was not a human. The Dewata's anger subsided. In the end, she embraced the man, and enveloped in bright light, the two vanished from the sight of the tribe chief and the warriors of the tribe, never to be seen again. Due to what happened, the second son was exiled from the tribe and ended up dying, accidentally falling into a cliff. The position of the tribe chief was succeeded by the third son, who married the woman that was supposed to be the eldest son's bride. Unknown to that tribe, the eldest son survived, traveling across the land with his beloved wife. The wife was no other than the Dewata, who was punished to become human after meddling with the mortals. Being the eldest son of a tribe chief, he had the charisma and heart of a warrior. It did not take long, and he managed to gather followers who soon became members of his tribe after they settled down. The eldest son and the former Dewata lived happily. They had children who were all humans. Soon, they became the future pillars of the tribe. However, even though the Dewata became human, an odd thing happened to her descendants. Unexpectedly, from generation to generation, someone with the ability to heal would appear among the future children, albeit very rare. It was the unique ability of the Dewata which also caused her husband to fall in love with her. It was not some absurd ability that could close wounds or save lives. Instead, it had the effect of calming the unsteady mind and relieving the fatigued. And from the story, they were people who awakened the full extent of this ability could envelop their hands in white, milky light. Day 150 to 3:21 p.m. School Plaza, Panganaban Central Elementary School, Bagong Bayan, Municipality of Panganaban, Catanduanes. Aaliyah gleefully told the story that came from the heritage of her ancestors. Back in the past, there was barely any variety of things that people did to pass their time. For men, they hunted animals and participated in contests to prove their strength. As for women and children, most of them felt content with just telling and listening to stories. Aaliyah, who came from a tribe in the past and served as their tribe's shaman, telling stories she learned from their elders was her hobby. Seeing her grandchildren intently listening to her story made her happy and enthusiastic. On the other hand, Mark was having quite a headache. Before, he thought that this ability was a byproduct of his high level of emphatic abilities. The possibility was not zero, after all. It was considering that it affects the mind of those he touched, albeit positively. Now, however, it was actually not the case. Gerger, your ancestry is getting richer and richer as time went by. May remarked, considering the things she knew about Mark. It's getting weirder and weirder if you ask me. Mark replied with a shrug. Nonetheless, this kind of thing was not impossible to happen. Even with human families, there was a possibility for their ancestry to have different human races mixed in. It was even more plausible in this country. After all, Philippines fell into the hands of several countries. Furthermore, it had connections to many countries around it even before Spain came to conquer. And now, the existence of magical beings got revealed. Some of them appearing in human ancestries was not impossible too. It was even more plausible because Mark's ancestry was unusual, to begin with one of their ancestors being a blood demon. Grandmother, Mark turned to Aaliyah. How did that Dewata's powers got passed on to their descendants? I'm pretty sure that Dewatas that became human by punishment were entirely stripped of their magical capabilities. Mark's question made Aaliyah smile. That detail is not passed down in the tribe, Aaliyah said. However, I knew that was supposed to be the case. The Dewata in the story, our ancestor, lost all her magical powers and lived as a common human woman. Both she and her husband died of old age after leading the tribe to prosperity. It was only after a few generations that the first case of this ability appeared. Among the descendants known to have this ability, I am the third, and I'm among the sixth generation of descendants after the story started. Furthermore, Aaliyah added, Among the past and following descendants, I'm the only one to awaken to this level. The others were far weaker. Some of them were able to release light from their hands, but rather than being thick and milky, theirs were rather thin. Looking at Mark, Aaliyah continued. Actually, your uncle is one of us, having this ability. But unlike all the others, you are the second person that attained the level closest to our ancestor when she was still a Dewata. Because of Aaliyah's words, Mark fell into deep thought. He remembered that his uncle, Roy, had a warm hand. It was not literally warm. Instead, he was able to relieve pain, fatigue, and other things with his massages using herbal oil. His services were even sought by some people who knew, bringing their sick children to him for some healing. But then, Mark noticed something. At first, Aaliyah said that it was a story passed down in her tribe. However, it was noticeable that her story was too accurate for a story that was passed down. It was almost at the level of first-hand knowledge. If not, how was it possible that Aaliyah knew that her ability was close to their ancestor when she was still a Dewata? Say, grandmother, Mark decided to ask directly. You seem to know a lot for a story generations older than you. It was like you were there to see it firsthand. Ha ha ha. Aaliyah laughed. Did I really sound like that? Then it's good. Mark and the girls were confused. This is how stories are told in our tribe before, Aaliyah explained. We tell it like we were present when everything happened to the extent of fabricating things. I thought I'm getting rusty, but I'm still capable. Actually, the story passed down in the tribe is incomplete, that those that told the story after had to add a few things here and there. It did not take long and the story became more and more exaggerated and far from what really happened. Then, May was about to spoke, thinking that what Aaliyah told them was not the truth. Oh, don't worry. Aaliyah smiled. What I told just now is the real story, not those that had been passed down the tribe. Mark and May paused. Even the little girls were confused. It's like this, Aaliyah explained further. The story I told you came from someone that witnessed it all. Aaliyah then turned to Mark. You met her already. Dewata Araya. Mark answered, the only possible person in his mind. You are right. Aaliyah nodded. The Dewata who became our ancestor, Dewata Aralea, she is Dewata Araya's. What do you call that again? Student. No. More like an apprentice, I think. It was also Dewata Araya that punished her to become human. That explained it. With Dewata Araya being the superior of Aralea, there was no doubt that she witnessed everything firsthand. She would have the most correct and most accurate version of the story. As for why Dewata Aralaya's ability appeared in her descendants, even Dewata Araya doesn't know why. Aaliyah continued. What we had in mind was that it had something to do with why people in our family could awaken magical abilities. But of course, that is not a proven answer. Mark fell silent for a bit. While Dewata Araya and his grandmother could not prove the reason, he had a hunch that it had to do with their bloodline as blood demons. It was a unique bloodline, after all. And as for why all these kinds of abilities from his ancestry were appearing on Mark, he could not help but stare at his right arm. There was only one thing that made his world turn around. It was the psi crystal that was now embedded on his arm. Although it was Keeper that created the psi crystal, it was still a magical crystal created from psi pathogen. Psi pathogen, the very same pathogen that awakened psychic abilities in creatures from the planet Arielis. It had some similar properties as mutagen, like mutating people using their genes. If that was the case, it was plausible that it was the cause why Mark awakened abilities present in his ancestry. At first, Mark only noticed his emphatic abilities being enhanced by the psi crystal. After all, it was the only ability he had at that time that was active without control. It was possible that at the very same time, his clairvoyance and this relieving hands were already at development. However, as a shut-in that barely interacted with people, he never had the chance to use these abilities even by accident. Pushing it further, it might also be the reason that Mark's bloodline as a blood demon resurfaced, albeit late. Now that Mark thought about it, It was also the psycrystal that made him use that crystal that enabled him to mutate further, allowing him to use miasma. By the way, Aaliyah suddenly spoke. We call it relieving hands in the tribe before since it had such effects. But actually, this ability only had those effects since it was being used on humans. So, it's not supposed to be used on humans. Mark snapped out of his thoughts and asked. I can be used like how we did. Aaliyah shook her head. However, think about it. Dewata Aralea is a Dewata. Although Dewatas could interact with humans under certain conditions, they could not just go and meddle with them. It meant that there was very little chance for her to use it on humans. Then, who was she using her abilities on? That came the question. There was no way that a Dewata's unique ability would be used for humans. There was no need to think. The answer immediately entered the minds of Mark, May, and Iola. Spirits and elementals. Mark answered. Yes, although there were specific conditions. Aaliyah nodded. It also had effects on demons too under the same conditions. And that condition? Mark asked. Spirits, elementals, and demons, whose bodies were created using magical energy, Aaliyah answered. If relieving hands is used on those kinds of creatures, it would have a different effect. And that effect is healing. Mark was surprised. He never thought about this. In his entourage, only a Mihan was the elemental to fit such criterion. However, as Mark prioritized the safety of everyone around him every time, a Mihan never got injured while staying by his side. Thus, there was no opportunity for him to discover this usage of this ability. Dewata Araya said that they called this ability magical healing hands instead. Aaliyah continued. Actually, it's also the reason why Dewata Araya convinced me to become a spirit. They lost Dewata Aralea because she fell in love with a human. As such, when it was discovered that I had almost the same strength as her, all sorts of spirits, even demons, approached me. And demons also targeted me to make me one of them, since I had the compatibility to become one. Aaliyah added. As it seemed, her human life was not a peaceful one. Looking at how she looked young, it was likely that she died young before she became a spirit. Then, my uncle could also be targeted, right? Mark asked. Ah, yes. Aaliyah nodded. But his magical healing hands are too weak, so he's only targeted because of his magical compatibility and not a priority. Besides, it was not like just any hostile entity could approach your mother's generation. Is it the spirit guides? Mark asked with a frown. Huh. Aaliyah was surprised. How did you know? I just knew. Mark shrugged. Aunt Jenny's should be that guy in armor, right? Wah. Aaliyah was surprised even more. Seriously, how? No, I won't ask anymore. Ha. Aaliyah gave up. By the looks of it, Mark would not answer. It was not like she wanted to force the answer out of her grandchild either. By the way, something entered Mark's mind. Dewata Araya is several hundred years old, huh? Mark was suddenly distracted by the absurd fact. As it seemed, it was very likely that Aaliyah came from a tribe way before the Spanish occupation. It meant that Aaliyah would be at least 500 years old. Then, there came Dewata Araya, who already had something like an apprentice, generations before Aaliyah was born. Ah, that's right. Aaliyah nodded. Dewatas don't really count their age since their appearance barely changes even if hundreds of years passed by. But Dewata Araya is a very very old granny. Crackle. Thoom. Suddenly, the sound of lightning and thunder was heard from the sky. Everyone suddenly looked at the sky. Not only Mark's group under the tree but also the others that were minding their own business. Even Geronimo and Padua, who were cleaning their guns inside the office, ran to the windows to look. That was how loud it was. Odd enough, the sky was clear and blue. There was barely any cloud either. Mark then smiled. So, she's a very very old granny, huh? Crackle. Thoom. Another sound of lightning and thunder echoed. This time, it was obvious that the sound came from the tall mountain in the west direction. Ha ha ha. Aaliyah laughed. Right. She's a very, very old granny. Crackle. Thoom. Creak. Another echo of lightning and thunder creeped out everyone. This time, it was a bit different since a tree in the middle of the schoolyard was hit. However, even though the tree was split into two, it did not catch fire. The tree was not too far from Mark's group. However, the distance was not too close for them to be affected. Still, the little girls were creeped out. Abigail transformed and jumped into Mark's lap. Miracle also shook in surprise. On the other hand, the other members of the group could not help but run in the direction of the ruckus, thinking that it was an enemy attack. Gerger. Grandmother. May stared at the culprits. It was not hard for her to understand what was happening. On the other hand, Mark and Aaliyah only smiled at May. This caused May to sigh. These two were definitely relatives. Day 150 to 4:10 p.m. Clear Lake, Magical Domain, Northwest Mountains, Municipality of Panganaban, Katandwanas. Dewata Araya. Please calm down. Ordulk, the Tomawo, yelled out in fluster. Beside him was Jenny, who was smiling bitterly. Currently, the prominent figures of the group of spirits and elementals gathered around the magical lake in this domain. It was a small spring lake with clear water surrounded by beautiful scenery. However, while it appeared like nothing but a scenic attraction, it was one of the core places in this domain. Don't fret too much, Ordulk. The fuming Dewata Araya rubbed her temples. I'm still calm. Dewata Araya, being a Dewata, had no choice but to stay calm. She did cause those lightning and thunder. However, while it was on impulse, she made sure that nothing got harmed. Well, except for that tree that was accidentally hit. Trees attract lightning as a path for it to reach the ground. It was an unavoidable circumstance. If Dewata Araya was not calm enough, a disaster far graver than those 3 lightning strikes and thunder could ensue. After all, her age was not just for show. Even among all the Dewatas remaining in the Philippines, she was the highest in the ranking. Unfortunately, beings like her had a lot of rules to follow, disabling her from being able to exert the best of her abilities. If she suddenly ran amok and began to hurt mortals, not only Dewata Araya would be denying her existence, but the protectors of the world, the eyes, would hunt her down. Still, Dewata Araya had a headache. Dewata Araya looked at the water of the lake, showing the scene where Aaliyah was laughing with satisfaction. Back in the days, Aaliyah was already an oddball in her tribe. She had an odd urge to look for things that seemed to be fun. It was to the extent that she learned to use swords and bows that were only supposed to be learned by men in her time. It was a time where women were only supposed to stay in their houses, do house chores, and become decorations for their husbands. And yet, there Aaliyah was, having the fun of her life. Becoming the shaman of their tribe at the age of 13 did not stop Aaliyah. As she was able to see spirits, ghosts, and demons, she began creating stories that scared even adults of their tribe. It was unfortunate that Aaliyah died of young age. At the age of 16, as the wife of the strongest warrior of their tribe. Aaliyah died while giving birth to her first child. Of course, it was not a natural death. Demons took advantage of her delivery to weaken her to the point of dying. At that time, Dewata Araya was fighting with demons, not knowing that it was a diversion. It was already late when they knew what was happening. Luckily, Aaliyah's child was fine, a perfectly human boy. At her death, the demons tried to steal her body and capture her soul. They intended to turn her into one of them. Fortunately, Dewata Araya managed to deal with the situation. At that time, Dewata Araya might be powerful, but the demons also had their leader as powerful as her. The battle for the body and soul of a single human had caused great losses on both sides. The spirits won. However, a lot of them received injuries. Dewata Araya was among the injured. The injured magical beings with physical bodies might be fine. Their bodies would heal over time. Those with bodies made of magical energies, however, were different. They needed magical energy to repair their bodies. Unfortunately, magical energy was extremely thin in the mortal world. If they had a pure spirit tree that could connect to the spirit dimension, things would be different. However, as rare as the tree was, even the renowned Dewata Araya did not have her own. Unfortunately, Dewatas had bodies made of magical energy. Dewata Araya's injuries at that time would take decades to heal. But as the deity that maintained the balance on this island, it was the worst thing to happen. Demons would definitely take advantage of the fact that Dewata Araya was weakened to erase all traces of their enemies. Thus, there was only one answer they came up with. It was to turn Aliyah into a spirit. After becoming one, she could heal Dewata Araya in a short time. That was what happened. And now, Aliyah was living side by side with Dewata Araya. And of course, while she behaved most of the time, there were a lot of times that she would become the cause of everyone's headaches. Very much like what was happening at the moment. The problem, now, however, was that Aliyah even managed to have an accomplice in making fun of Dewata Araya. Who would not be infuriated by that? Ha! Dewata Araya sighed, staring at Mark in the image displayed on the water of the lake. Who would have thought that this rare ability would suddenly appear once more? Moreover, on the hands of a demon. Aliyah did not even hesitate to say everything. But Mark did not seem to be a bad person. Jenny spoke. You are saying that because he's your nephew, Ordulk interjected. I don't think that someone like him capable of murdering other humans without blinking is a good person. Jenny fell silent since Ordulk did not say that without reason. During the time that Mark attacked the rebel base, they were all watching. They all saw how Mark ended the lives of the rebel without a shred of conscience. In fact, Jenny found it terrifying and did not know whether she would be able to face her nephew without fear. On the other hand, Aliyah did not seem to mind it and even went to meet Mark and his group. Back in her time, tribal wars happen from time to time. And from the long time she lived as a spirit, she had already seen a lot of people dying in different ways. Furthermore, as someone that wasn't even able to take care of her own child, she was very eager to meet Mark's group. Beings like them had a very strict rule. They could not meddle with human affairs only unless it was the humans first that did so. As such, after Aliyah became a spirit, she was only able to interact with her family until they once. It was when they died and before their souls passed on. In the case of Mark's group, however, it was different. Mark was a demon. So is his wife and children. And because of that, the rules did not apply to them. Aliyah was very eager to spend time with Mark as she was seeing her son on him. Jenny watched the image on the water of the lake. There was a tint of envy on her face. Aliyah was having fun, finally able to find a relative they could interact with. Yet, here she was, only watching from far away. I wish I can join them. Jenny could not help but murmur. You know that you can't go out of this place yet. Dewata Araya spoke with a sigh. It's only been a few years since you became a spirit. Your body is still unstable. There is no need to mention that the magical energy outside is too thin, and negative energies can easily affect you. I know. Jenny looked down at the water. I just can't help it looking at them. To say, Dewata Araya and the others could understand Jenny and Aliyah. They were humans before and, as such, they needed human touch. While becoming a spirit dampened their bodily desires, the desires of the soul and mind were still there. And to say, a human stepping into the path of becoming a spirit was a rather lonely one. The orb of light, Bituin, bounced on Jenny's shoulder, trying to console her. Still, it is surprising how that Mark is too strong. Darielio, the leader of Yasaz, the Black Children, spoke at the side. Although Bituin confirmed that he was not lying when he said that he's a pureblood, seeing his abilities in action is frightening. Everyone could only agree with the Yasaz words. They all watched what happened and saw how Mark faced hundreds of armed humans alone. Of course, they were also amazed about the human leader of the rebels. However, Mark's abilities overshadowed her. We are lucky that he's not an enemy. Dariello added. Their first encounter with Mark was definitely not a good one. They surrounded him and his dragon, thinking that they were enemies. If it really ended up in a battle, it would be catastrophic for their side. You all did not have to worry. Dewata Araya spoke, staring at Mark at the image in the water. He might not be a good person, but he is definitely not evil. Mark did not harm any innocent people in that battle with the rebels. Although it was quite strange how Mark was able to accurately differentiate those people who were forced to become a rebel. Dewata Araya and the others continued to watch the situation. Knowing that they were being watched, however, Mark and Aaliyah became more playful. The two began saying things that would rile up those who were watching them. Surely, Aaliyah would be scolded when she returned. However, it seemed that it did not matter to her at all as long as she was able to enjoy herself. Suddenly Dewata Araya frowned. Not minding the others watching the image on the water of the lake, she waved her hand. The image on the water changed and was focused on somewhere else. There, the spirits were surprised. In the image, dark clouds began to envelop the sky. However, these clouds were not gathering, but instead, was rising from a mountain. Those damn demons are conducting another ritual, Ordulk said, knowing the image that they were seeing. Did they manage to catch more humans? Ordulk and the others were confused. The humans were now gathered at the southwest of the island, at the settlement the human government created. Although there were also humans at the north of the island, the demons would not be able to go there unnoticed without passing by their territory. Is it the remaining rebels? Jenny said, thinking that there were still some outposts of the rebels remaining around the area. With Jenny's words, Dewata Araya began waving her hands, switching the image on the water consecutively. The images showed the outposts of the rebels that Mark's group did not encounter. It's all empty, Darielio said, noticing that the outposts had no people at all. It didn't look like they got attacked. Did those humans leave? Those humans must have left. Dewata Araya said, knowing that their base is destroyed, they might have communicated with each other to gather their remaining members. But where did those humans gather? Ordulk spoke in turn. Did they leave our territory? We didn't notice any demon activity, after all. Look. Dewata Araya waved her hand and caused a specific place to appear on the image in the water. It was an empty road. The very same road that Mark's group took as they went south. It was at the border of their territory. As such, the image could not go any further. However, they noticed several vehicles abandoned on the road. Some were even overturned. They were sure that these vehicles were not there when Mark's group passed by this road. We should have monitored those idiots, Darielio slapped his forehead childishly. Because we did not care about those humans, we ended up letting them bolster the number of those damn demons. No one expected this at all, Jenny said with a frown. I'm sure that the rebels were supposed to know that the area was off limits. We watched them being briefed by their leaders about that, right? That's why I called them idiots, Darielio said angrily. Just because their leader is gone, they did not bother about the rules they were given anymore. Let's just wish that most of those humans failed to become demons. Or else, we would need to get ready for a bloody battle. Ordulk chimed in. Whether they succeeded or not, everyone should prepare, Dewata Araya spoke strictly. I am convinced that they would begin to move after this. It is because those are the last group of humans they could get their hands into without moving out of their territory. Dewata Araya added. Day 151 to 3 a.m. Ritual Grounds, Demon Territory, Southeast Mountains, Municipality of Bado, Katandwanas. The Witching Hour. It was the time between 12 midnight to 4 in the morning. Also known as the Devil's Hour, it was the time of the day when demons, witches, and ghosts appeared or were believed to be more powerful. In Western Christian tradition, the Devil's Hour was between 3 and 4 in the morning. It was the exact inverse time of the time of death of Jesus Christ on the cross. No matter what tradition, however, they all had a similar description of the witching hour. During this time, it was believed that rituals and sacrifices had a better effect. It also causes heightened activities of malignant ghosts and evil spirits. Poltergeists were also observed to be more active during the Devil's Hour. Paranormal activities such as ghost hunting, Ouija board sessions, and even dangerous ritual challenges had the best returns. In fact, some of these sessions were required to be done at this time to be effective. But why was this happening? After all, it was a world supposed to be ruled by modern science. It was strange for such a magical phenomenon to happen every day. What most creatures in the world did not know. This phenomenon was caused by the instability in the barrier that separated the mortal world and the spirit dimension. There were 4 main dimensions created on Earth. First was the mortal world. It was the only dimension originally created to house the world's inhabitants in its intended route of evolution. It was one of the 2 largest dimensions. The second dimension was the spirit dimension. It was a replica of Earth to a certain degree. It was where most magical creatures born on Earth were sent after the purge to make the mortal world dominated by humans. The higher dimension was the third one. It was where the servants of the ousted gods that were born on Earth were sent to. As such, it was primarily inhabited by holy spirits and angelic beings. In many religious beliefs, they also called this dimension heaven. Lastly, the lower dimension. It was the dimension that housed the evilest creatures born on Earth, the devils and higher demons. To say, it was the literal hell of this planet. What had the 4 dimensions had to do with the witching hour? The dimensions themselves were stable, being created as literal worlds for creatures to live in. However, the barrier that was separated the dimensions was another thing. It was made of energy and was not a perpetual existence. Thus, to maintain a barrier that separated 4 literal worlds, a large energy source was needed. To maintain this barrier, the 4 worlds needed to contribute magical energy. It was not a problem except for the mortal world. A world that could not generate magical energy would not be able to contribute the energy needed to maintain the barrier. Thus, a solution came up. Unlike the 3 dimensions, there was something that only the mortal world had, being the main dimension. It was the direct light from the sun. Light was a form of energy itself, and the light from the sun also contained positive traits. In Chinese cosmology, they called it yang energy. Not only it was able to substitute the energy for the barrier, but it also purified the energy leaking from the barrier. But of course, it was not a perfect solution. Only the places shined by the sun had the strongest state of the dimensional barrier. During the night when the sun was not present, the barrier also weakened to some degree. The weakened barrier enabled energy from the other 3 dimensions to seep into the mortal world. And without the purifying energy from the sun, more of the energy that leaked was negative. That negative energy would cause beings with evil tendencies to grow empowered. It also gave more magical energy for rituals to succeed. Thus, it caused the witching hour to happen. In the wide and open space in the middle of the mountains of Bato, Catanduanes, quite a number of people gathered even though it was still this early. The temperature in the mountains during this time was cold, but these people did not bother despite some of them wearing clothing that only covered their private parts. Well, the unconscious ones could not complain of the cold even if they felt it. Most of these people were not humans. They were demons. A lot of them had features like fangs, claws, and even fur-covered bodies. Although many of them looked like humans, they had a cold and suppressing aura around them. The only humans around were about 150 unconscious people. All of them were lined up together, lying on the ground in the middle of the open space. As for the demons, they were all gathered at the edge of the space, encircling the unconscious humans. Looking from above, one would be able to see what was happening. A large sinister drawing was painted on the ground. With the red color that the outlines had, it was clear that it was painted using fresh blood. What kind of blood it was? There was no need to ask. With the nature of these demons, the blood used was likely from a recently killed human. The drawing is a ritual circle. A magic circle specifically used for sinister rituals, especially ones involving bloody sacrifices. Dark clouds covered the sky, showing the preparations that the demons made. These clouds appeared before sunset and continued to persist until now. Unfortunately, because of its distance to human settlements and the tall mountains that surrounded it, no mortal was able to witness this bad omen. And now that the peak of the devil's hour came, it was time for the ritual to start. Ah! In the middle of the ritual circle, a young man named Harris woke up with an uncomfortable groan. Harris was feeling cold. It was like he was freezing to death. Suddenly, his eyes jolted open. Memories flooded his mind. Harris was one of the men forced to become a rebel. The bastards had his girlfriend, so he had no choice if he wanted to keep her safe. But yesterday, for some reason, their superiors had been edgy. Soon, he and those with the same circumstances as him came to know that the main base was attacked and was destroyed. What about their loved ones, then? They were told that they were evacuated south. Of course, Harry's and his friends did not know whether it was true or not. Afraid that their loved ones would be implicated, they just followed. Yesterday, they left their outpost with the command of their outpost leader. It did not take long and the group from their outpost joined with the others. Apparently, everyone was going south, though Harris heard that they would pass by an outpost they lost contact with. As it appeared, the outpost they went to was already abandoned. Their leaders said that the people in this outpost must have joined the evacuation already. Harris felt that it was odd, considering the marks of bullets that were scattered everywhere. Continuing south, they were attacked. Was it the military? At that time, Harris felt that it was bad if the military ambushed them. Many people among them were just forced to obey the rebels, after all. But when Harris saw what they were going against, he could not help but wish that it was the military instead. It was because instead of humans, it was monsters that stood within their way. The battle did not even last long. It was a one-sided fight with the rebels on the losing side. It was a nightmare. My lord. It appears that one of them managed to resist the hypnosis. Suddenly, voices registered in the ears of Harris. He could not help but try to stand up and face the source of the voice. That was when Harris realized. He could not move anything aside from his head. He could not feel anything binding him on the ground. Yet, he could not move even a muscle of his finger. It was like sleep paralysis, but several times much worse. In a panic, Harris turned his head around. He then saw his friends and the rebels lying around him. All of them seemed to be asleep. They were all naked to their underwear. That was when he noticed that he was the same. No wonder it felt too cold. Harris tried calling out, opening his mouth, shouting as loud as he could. But no voice came out. That was when another voice entered his ears. It was deep and for some reason, made his heart tremble. It does not matter. We will continue with the ritual. Ritual? What ritual? Is this some kind of FC King joke? Harris cried out in his mind. Though I'm looking forward to what that man will turn out. The deep voice was heard once more. And then, the deep voice started speaking. Harris could not understand what the man was saying. It felt as if it was a language not of this world. Suddenly, Harris's eyes were filled with a surge of red light. He turned his head around in panic. He realized that the light was coming from the ground. And that was where the horror started. Harris's eyes turned wide as he saw his friend beside him convulsing. It was like those horror movies where the actress was being possessed. He noticed that it was not only his friend but everyone lying around him. The intensity was varied, but all of them were definitely undergoing some crazy event. Suddenly, Harris's body was filled with pain. It was as if his body was being torn from inside. Soon, even though he could not move his body voluntarily, he was already convulsing violently like the others. Harris bit his lip. Tears on his eyes, he tried to bear with the pain. However, his perseverance did not take long after the pain intensified to the point that he wished to die. With his mouth wide open and his saliva pouring out, the mind of Harris gave way because of the pain. His body continued to convulse, his head fell to the side. His pupils dilated. The body of his friend beside Harris started to tear open. His skin was cracking, showing muscles being torn apart. His body already had a distorted shape, as if he was an inflated balloon. Burst. Suddenly the body of his friend burst open. Blood splattered on his face, but he could not care at all. With wide eyes, he looked at the monster in front of his eyes. Will I also end up like him? That was the last thought Harris had. His mind suddenly went blank in a literal sense. His body started to heat up, dispersing all the coldness he felt before. The convulsing of his body stopped. Instead, it started pulsing. Harris could hear the sounds of amazement around. Unfortunately, all his consciousness and memories were already gone. The temperature of his body continued to rise. Soon, the mysterious force binding Harris was gone, and he stood up. Well, Harris was already gone. Instead, what stood there was a new being. This is unexpected. We managed to get a flame demon. The man with a deep voice was heard once more. It was clear in his tone that he was in glee. Unfortunately, only 50 became demons, my lord. A calm voice was heard. The rest only became ferals. It doesn't matter. The Lord replied. Throw away the ferals outside like the others. The Lord then faced the audience, and the new demons staring blankly at him. Our sacred ritual tonight ended with an unexpected addition to our ranks. Today, we will prepare. We already gained enough power to conquer. Tomorrow, we will move north. We will slaughter those spirits and take revenge for our brethren they killed in the past. This is my command. Yes, my lord. All the demons kneeled towards their lord.